Teaching about divorce, chapter 19. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went to the regions of Judea beyond the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he cured them there. Some Pharisees came to him, and to test him, they said, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason, a male shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.' So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined them together, let no one separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?" He said to them, "It was because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But I say, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, not immortality,
I was about to say I read the wrong translation.
um, for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can." Philip, since you're the expert on marriage, why don't you?
I am. I'm not married, everyone, just so you know. He's not referring to anything. Okay. Which part do you want me to talk about?
I mean, okay, so I mean, we can. The first part. Well, I guess the part that I'm a little bit confused about is when he talks about, when the disciples say, "Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?" Um, Maybe it's my knowledge, my limited knowledge of the Old Testament, but what is that referring to?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, unlike marriage, I'm not an expert on the Old Testament. Okay, well, yeah, maybe someone else would have an answer to what exactly is referring to here. Of course, his answer to it is interesting because he's saying that marriage is specific only for certain people, which in the Paul's letters, right, that's also stated again. So there's this idea that marriage is well, basically it looks like for people who can't control themselves. That's what it looks like. I don't think that's too radical of a statement. Yeah, it's the one who can accept this should accept it, and the one who could accept this, he doesn't mean, of course, the person who wants to not be married, but still go around. He means the person
Well,
who cannot be celibate. That's the person who should be accepting this.
well, it is kind of interesting because it does seem like he kind of at least appears to suggest that if not everyone is suitable for like marriage, or that not everyone, if you don't have the capacity to like, do marriage properly, you shouldn't get married. Or if you don't have the capacity to control your sexual desires, then become a eunuch. Um,
Well, I wanted to
well,
touch on another point.
another point.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing was about like the actual marriage and
Okay,
what it is. But
sure.
maybe someone else can talk about like
Not the eunuchs.
yeah, maybe I'll leave it to our other guest
to
I discuss the eunuchs.
I don't have anything to say about the eunuchs.
Should we all just get vasectomies?
Okay, well, before we I'm an expert on marriage, so I cannot. Okay, let's talk about this. So there's this idea here that obviously he restates from Genesis. We talk about male and female, and then there's their union. It's one flesh and all this thing. I do find it interesting because obviously we have man is in the image of God, so marriage is sort of has this trinity in it as well, where you have man, woman, and child. Obviously, I don't mean can have multiple children, but but I mean
Right,
child
yeah.
in general. So again, there's this like marriage is sort of, it looks like it's replicating like the triune God in a sense. So that's what we have one flesh, but there's three individuals uh, at least in marriage, right?
It is interesting too, like when he says, um, "Be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Um, it is interesting that like there is kind of this cycle that happens where like um, you have you know the separation into two
Hmm.
to two flesh, and then with marriage, uh, it's like you're bringing them back together.
You become one so that you can become many in terms of reproduction.
Interesting. I was thinking more in terms of like just you go from being two
Yeah,
to really there's it's like this emphasis on marriage is not about one person another person.
mm.
It's like when you become married, your lives with the other person become one.
Yeah,
Like, you know, you almost like in a sense lose your individuality.
yeah, yeah.
um, because you are taking it's like a leap to become like literally attached to the other person.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think that's why I mentioned the Trinity, because for me, it's not. You've got to be careful here, right? Because the flesh is being used, so it's the in technical terms, right? It's the nature that's becoming unified, but not the person,
Right.
right? So you're not losing your personhood, obviously,
Right.
as you're becoming one in marriage.
I mean, that's debatable,
But being well, maybe you're the real expert on marriage, or divorce. But I don't think you're supposed to be losing yourself, right, in the marriage. But there's a very strong unity which is expressed through this nature becoming one, which would be the body becoming one, right?
It's a giving of yourself in the same way that we talked about, like losing yourself to gain the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like you only gain really through giving
Yeah.
fully, and you can't gain from marriage by being purely selfish and only taking. It doesn't work. You have to be giving.
Right. And there's also this idea of children coming into play again, right?
Yeah.
So, like, obviously, the tradition is that the purpose of marriage is also directed towards a third person, at the very least, right? Which would be the child. And that's interesting again because we were talking about children and innocence and humbleness, right? The exaltation of children, right? So now we have this marriage, which is the precondition for children in this Christian sense.
Yeah. And I think also it's important to say that Jesus has a very high view of marriage. In that because I've got in my notes something about there were two schools of thought in the Jewish interpretation. Some allowed for divorce for like the smallest thing. The example here is someone Hillel, based on interpretations of Deuteronomy, said that he would allow a man to divorce his wife if he did anything he disliked, even if she burnt his food while cooking it. Jesus clearly took the side of Shammai, another interpretation, which has like very strict criterion for divorce. And it's not just the idea of criteria for divorce that Jesus has a high view of. Like in general, Jesus has a very high view of marriage because he realizes not just the practical implications in terms of, I don't know, children and becoming one and that kind of thing, but it's so clearly a picture of Christ and the church, that he needs to have a high view of marriage because it is pointing to a metaphysical reality, as it were, of Christ and the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And that's what I meant when I was talking about the child as well. So
Yeah.
I don't mean it in the practical sense of
Well, it's
I'm
both.
not
Yeah,
bringing
yeah.
in any like practical argument here about the
Yeah.
best way to raise children
Right,
or
okay.
have children is through
Right.
marriage. I quite mean it in the this is like a metaphysical sense of humanity being united in a similar way that God is united,
Yeah.
which is the only correct way for persons to be united, right?
Yeah.
If we're taking the good to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
God.
Yeah.
So we have this imitation of the Imago Dei
Yeah.
being replicated in humanity through marriage. At least that's what I'm seeing here.
Mm.
So that's what I'm getting from, like, partly from this, and that's why it's so important for the marriage to occur. And then the divorce is more like the practical application of humanity creeping in again, because we have this like picturized image of marriage
Mm.
and what it's supposed to be, and then we have reality, which which obviously is different. So that's why you have to make these compromises and talk about divorce and things like that. Which is, well, do you guys have anything about unfaithfulness being the main? For my translation says unfaithfulness. Your one said immorality.
Yeah, sexual immorality, not immortality.
Not immortality.
Yeah.
I did quite like the concept of marriage is in a sense like there is the joining, but there's also the leaving of the father and the mother.
Mm.
And I was thinking about, like, in ceremonies, how it's the handoff of the
Yeah.
father walking the daughter down the aisle and
Yeah, yeah.
handing him
Mm.
to I think that's quite an interesting, I don't know, motif of like your there's honor your father and mother, but you're kind of giving that up in a sense. Not giving up the honoring,
Yeah.
but and it also can be interesting when you think about like the role that the father and mother have in letting go of their child.
Yeah.
And what that entails. Like it's not just the person letting go of their connection to their father and mother, but it's the father and mother letting go of the child and giving them to another human being.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I thought that was interesting.